We were at a fancy restaurant having dinner with the family when my daughter-in-law got up to take my granddaughter to the restroom. Suddenly, a terrifying old woman sneaked up to me. She shoved a small red cloth pouch into my hand and whispered, "Call a taxi and run away from here with your son. Do it if you do not want him to become a sacrifice." Terrified, I pulled my son to leave, and I froze when I saw what was inside the bag. But before I continue, check if you have subscribed to the Elderly Stories channel and share in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know how far our stories of revenge travel. That day started like any other normal day. I was putting the last fried egg on the plate when little arms hugged me around the waist from behind. "Good morning, Grandma." It was Sarah, my little granddaughter. I turned around and stroked her head. Michael, my son, had also just come downstairs. He gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, a habit he had kept since he was little and never changed. "Good morning, Mom," he said, but his tone was a bit dull. I observed him closely. He looked a bit pale with slight dark circles that betrayed a sleepless night. "I have not slept well lately at all," he complained as he sat at the table. Linda, his wife, was the last to come down. As always, she appeared in an elegant office dress, with her hair in a high bun projecting an active and professional image. She smiled at me, a perfect and cordial smile. "Thanks for breakfast, Mom," she said, but she only took a glass of cloudy green celery juice and took a sip. Suddenly, she announced with enthusiasm, "Tonight we are all going out to dinner together. I just closed a deal with a very important client downtown. We have to celebrate." She said she had already reserved a table at a luxurious rooftop restaurant, like a notification, not an invitation, leaving no room for refusal. That night on the way to the restaurant, Linda would not stop talking about her work at the Energy Recovery Center. She spoke with passion about her clients who had regained balance and confidence thanks to her meditation and healing therapies. Michael was behind the wheel driving in silence. From time to time he nodded, but through the rearview mirror I could clearly see how sunken his eyes were and the exhaustion he carried. The restaurant was on the roof of a skyscraper, with a panoramic view of the city which shone like a galaxy on Earth. The dinner went on with joy. Halfway through the meal, Sarah was playing and spilled her strawberry juice on her white dress. Linda sighed. "I'm going to take her to the bathroom to clean her up," she said, and took her away. At that moment, Michael's cell phone rang. He frowned and said it was an important work call. Then he got up and went out to the terrace looking for a bit of silence. I was left alone at that huge table, and then from behind a large marble column, a woman came out. She wore old, faded clothes totally out of place in that luxurious setting, but what left me breathless was her face. A long, deep scar crossed her cheek down to her chin. Lifting one side of her mouth in a disturbing way, she walked straight toward me without hesitating. Her look was urgent and desperate. The diners at nearby tables began to notice the scene. They murmured. A waiter saw her and hurried to approach. The old woman acted very fast. She put a small red cloth bag, old and worn, into my hand under the table. Her hand was icy and bony. It touched my skin like a cold branch. She leaned toward me and whispered with a harsh and hurried voice right next to my ear, every word sticking like a knife into my false tranquility. "Call a taxi and get your son out of here right now if you do not want him to be the sacrifice." Just when the waiter arrived and asked me kindly, "Ma'am, do you need anything?" the old woman turned around and went quickly toward the emergency exit, disappearing into the darkness before anyone could react. I froze. My heart was beating hard in my chest. That ghostly warning would not stop echoing in my head. Without thinking any more, I got up immediately. I told the waiter I did not feel well and rushed out to look for Michael. I found him outside. He had just put out a cigarette. His face looked exhausted under the yellow light. I did not say a single word. I just grabbed his hand tightly and pulled him. "Let's go, Michael. Right now." He was surprised and seemed a bit annoyed. "Mom, what is wrong?" I did not answer. I simply dragged him to the parking lot. I pushed him into the driver's seat and slammed the door. Under the cold, fluorescent light of the parking lot, I opened the red bag with trembling hands. Inside was a leather amulet with twisted symbols drawn in dark ink that looked like dried blood. I told Michael everything that happened, my voice broken by fear. He listened, frowning at first, but at the end of my story he let out a laugh. His laughter echoed in the silence of the parking lot. It sounded strange, alien. "Oh, Mom, you are exaggerating," he said, trying to contain himself. Surely it was some beggar who invented a new trick to get money. In these luxurious places, people like that sometimes sneak in. You are tired and imagining things. He ignored everything I said, all my fears. He opened the car door with a softer tone. "Come on, Linda and Sarah are waiting for us. We have to go back and finish dessert." I had no choice but to follow my son back to the table. Linda and Sarah were already there, and the girl was wearing a clean, spare dress. Linda asked me kindly if something was wrong, and I had no choice but to lie, saying that I felt a little sick. The rest of the dinner, I could not swallow another bite. The intense and disturbing gaze of the old woman and the blood-stained amulet kept going around in my head. From that moment, I began to observe in silence with obsession. The change in Michael was becoming more evident. He was no longer my son, but like a shadow of himself. His memory began to rust. One day, he spent 15 minutes looking for his wallet, even though it was right in front of him on the table. Another time, when I reminded him of his dentist appointment, he looked at me confused and asked what appointment. The last straw was when he was talking to me about work and could not remember the name of Richard, his closest partner for 5 years. He scratched his head, confused and frustrated, and then changed the subject. Sleep attacked him at any time like a thief stealing his lucidity. He could fall asleep in the middle of dinner, the fork falling from his hand with a metallic clatter on the plate. When he woke up from those microsleeps, his eyes were dull, lifeless. It took him several seconds, sometimes more than a minute, to orient himself to know who he was or where he was. One night, while we were watching TV as a family, something happened that froze my blood. The movie was over. The screen was completely black, and only our silhouettes were dimly reflected on the sofa. Suddenly, Michael let out a low laugh, like a hoarse whisper, a dry, joyless laugh. He was staring at the black screen and laughing. "What are you laughing at, Michael?" I asked, trying to sound calm. He started and turned around with the expression of a surprised child doing something forbidden. "Huh, what did you say, Mom?" He really did not know what he had just done. In the middle of all this, Linda seemed like the perfect wife. She kept expressing her concern for Michael's health. Every night before sleeping, she prepared an herbal infusion for him with her own hands. That tea was dark like mud with an earthy smell of roots and wet soil. "It is an exclusive energy cleaning formula from the center," she explained to me. "It helps him release negative energy and sleep better." She insisted that Michael should not take any other medication. When I suggested cautiously, "What if we take Michael to the doctor?" Linda dismissed it immediately with a smile still on her lips, but an icy look. "Oh, Mom, modern medicine does not understand energy flow problems. They are only going to give him chemical and harmful pills. Trust me, this tea will help him heal." I felt my throat completely closed. How could I argue with logic that I could not understand? That night I had a horrible nightmare. I dreamed I was in our own house, but everything was rotten, covered in cobwebs. The paint on the walls was falling apart. The furniture was twisted. From the floor above, I heard Michael's weak and broken voice. "Mom, help me." I ran to his room, but the hallway stretched endlessly, as if I were trapped on a never-ending path. When I finally reached the door, I saw Linda with her back turned standing in front of me. She turned slowly, and in her hand she had a small knife shining under the pale moonlight. I woke up with a start, soaked in sweat, my heart pounding so hard I felt it was going to pop out of my chest. My throat was dry. I needed a glass of water. I left the room on tiptoe. The house was plunged in almost absolute silence, only interrupted by the ticking of the pendulum clock in the living room. As I passed my son and his wife's room, I noticed the door was ajar, leaving a small crack open. I was going to continue straight to the kitchen, but a sound made me stop. It was Linda's voice, but she was not speaking in English or Spanish. It was a series of repetitive guttural sounds with strange hisses that I had never heard. It did not sound like a language, but like an ancient spell. A shiver ran down my back, but curiosity was stronger. I held my breath and approached the door carefully, looking through the crack. A dim and flickering light came from inside. It was the flame of a single black candle placed on the floor, and under that light the scene I saw left me frozen. Linda was kneeling. She wore a black tunic that covered her from head to toe, making her look like a shapeless shadow. In front of her was a small, dark wooden statue. It had a human shape, but its arms and legs were abnormally long. And the most terrifying thing was its head completely smooth, without eyes, without a nose, without a mouth. An empty face without expression. Beside her in the big bed, Michael slept deeply. He was lying on his back arms at his sides, motionless like a log, knowing nothing of the macabre ritual occurring a few steps from him. A strong and unpleasant smell slipped through the crack, hitting my nose. It was the acrid smell of burnt wax mixed with a faint metallic stench, the smell of blood. I backed away immediately, covering my mouth with both hands to contain the scream that threatened to come out of my chest. I took a step back then, another careful not to make even the slightest noise. The wooden floor creaked as if it wanted to betray me. I turned and ran to my room like a fugitive. I locked it, trembling. The click of the lock resonated dryly in the middle of the silent night. I curled up in bed until the first rays of dawn filtered through the window. I could not sleep anymore. Linda's sinister whisper and the disturbing image of the faceless statue kept drilling into my mind. All the loose pieces fit now into a complete and gruesome image. I knew it with certainty. The old woman's warning in the restaurant had not been the madness of a beggar. It was true. The next morning, I went down to the kitchen with legs heavy like lead, trying to start a new day as if nothing had happened. My hand trembled slightly as I put the plate of eggs on the table, but I hoped no one noticed. Linda came down the stairs, strangely radiant, almost glowing. Her energy contrasted completely with the decay of my son. She hummed a happy melody and then turned to me with a sweet voice. "Mom, did you sleep well?" I nodded my head without daring to look her in the eyes, fearing she could read the horror and disgust I felt. Michael came down staggering like a sleepwalker with dark circles that had now turned a deep purple tone. He let himself fall onto the chair and rested his head on the table with his hair all messed up. "I am very tired," he muttered with a hoarse voice. Linda went immediately to him, surrounding him with her arm and caressing his back tenderly. "Drink it, my love," she told him in a low voice, pushing the glass of herbal tea towards him. "You will feel better right away." The way she looked at him was not that of a worried wife, but that of someone evaluating a possession. I had to act. Right now. "I do not feel well today," I said, feigning tiredness in my voice. "My knees hurt a lot. It must be because of the weather change. I think I'm going to stay home and rest. I will not visit my friend Susan as I had planned." Linda turned to look at me, and in her eyes shone a flash difficult to decipher. "Really well rest. Mom, do not overexert yourself." Her concern was perfect in every detail, but I knew that deep down she was celebrating. My plan had begun. I sat on the living room sofa pretending to read an old novel, but my mind and ears were tense like a violin string, attentive to every noise in the house. First was the sound of Michael starting the car, the engine sounding weak and moving away, taking with it a part of my son's soul. About an hour later, I heard Linda upstairs encouraging Sarah, "Hurry up, my love. We are going to be late for school." Then the hurried little steps of the girl and the front door slamming shut. I ran to the window and lifted the curtain slightly. I stood motionless, holding my breath, waiting until Linda's silver car disappeared at the end of the street. The house was now only mine. Silence covered everything, but it was not a peaceful silence, but that of a predator holding its breath. It was a heavy silence of horrible secrets. I took a deep breath to fill myself with courage and went up the stairs. My hand rested on the handrail. I felt my bones were going to fail me. Every step was a burden, taking me closer to a truth that perhaps I did not want to face. In front of my son and his wife's bedroom door. I hesitated for a second. Guilt invaded me, the guilt of someone invading privacy. But then the image of Michael exhausted, soulless, and Linda's whispers in the night pushed me. I had no choice anymore. I pushed the door and entered. The room was tidy to a point that gave me chills, the sheets perfectly folded. On the wall, a huge photo of their wedding. My Michael in the image looked so happy with a look full of joy and hope. Linda's radiant smile next to him now stabbed me like a piece of glass. I started searching. I opened the closet, rummaging through Linda's expensive clothes. I checked every drawer. I checked under the papers on her desk. Nothing seemed out of place. There were only bills, contracts, and books on positive energy. My mother's instinct whispered something to me. I knelt and looked into the dark space under the bed. At first, I only saw dust and some old shoe boxes, but looking closely at the deepest corner against the wall, I saw something else, a dark shape. I threw myself on the cold floor, stretching my arm as much as I could, and finally my trembling fingers managed to touch it. I pulled it out. It was a dark, antique wooden box, with the surface worn by the passage of time. It had no padlock, just a bronze latch already blackened. My hands were shaking so much I could almost not open it. Finally, it came loose. The lid opened and revealed what was inside. Everything was arranged just as I had suspected and feared. First, a faceless statue wrapped in a piece of black velvet. When I removed the cloth, a cold air came out of it. Its wooden body was smooth and icy to the touch, so cold it gave me chills. The empty head seemed to look at me, sucking up to the last corner of my courage. Then a red cloth amulet. It was identical to the one the old woman had given me, only this one looked a bit newer. I took the other one out of my pocket to compare. They were alike as 2 drops of water. From the worn fabric to the strange symbols drawn with dark ink. Next to it there was a black candle with only half left. The melted wax had run all over the tin base. But around the base there were reddish-brown stains, dry and brittle. I knew that was not wax, it was blood. And at the bottom of the box there was a leather notebook without a title. I turned the yellowish pages. They were full of handwritten letters with a type of writing I could not decipher, mixed with drawings of 5-pointed stars, crescent moons, and stick figures in strange positions as part of some rite. And then I saw it. The name Michael Johnson was written over and over again, page after page, like a curse, like a death sentence. Next to his name, there were dates and symbols I did not understand. I went back quickly to the first pages and saw other names all unknown, but all were crossed out with a brutal red line. I did not cry. The fear had hardened inside me, turning into a cold determination. Tears were useless at that moment. I took out my cell phone, carefully placed each object on the light carpet of the floor so they would stand out. I took photos from all angles. I zoomed in on the symbols in the notebook on the page with Michael's name on the dried blood stain on the candle. I made sure all images came out sharp without losing a single detail. When I finished, I put everything back very carefully in the box, exactly in the same place where I found it. I pushed the box back to the dark corner under the bed, erasing every trace of my presence. I left the room and closed the door softly. I had proof. Now I just needed to find someone who believed in this proof, someone who would not laugh in my face thinking I am a crazy old woman. That afternoon, I gathered all my courage and knocked on my son's door. He was lying on the bed with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I sat on the edge of the bed. My trembling hand rested on his shoulder. "Michael," I started with a hoarse voice, "do not you feel that something in you has changed? Do not you feel different? Or maybe you feel that your wife—" I did not manage to finish. Suddenly, he sat up, pushing my hand away with a slap. For the first time in his life, he yelled at me. His empty eyes shone with a fury I did not recognize. "Enough, Mom," he shouted. "Are you obsessed with that beggar woman? Linda is taking very good care of me. Can't you see it? She worries about me and everything. Stop suspecting her." Then he turned around and looked at the wall, his back hunched like a hedgehog on the defensive. An invisible wall rose between the two of us. I stood there paralyzed, feeling failure getting into my bones. I already lost my son. He does not trust me anymore. Linda has him completely manipulated. I alone cannot save him. The next morning I woke up with a feeling so suffocating I could not even breathe. I needed to get out. I needed air. I needed to see the sun and unknown faces. I took my bag and told Linda I was going to the farmer's market, the busiest market in the city center, to buy some spices and fresh vegetables. She just nodded without asking more questions, as if even my presence bothered her. The noise of the market helped me calm down a bit. The shouts of the vendors, the haggling of customers, the aroma of ripe fruits and fresh herbs relieved me, even if a little, from the fear that was eating me inside. I tried to lose myself among the people, let the chaos outside drown the chaos inside. While I was choosing a bunch of cilantro, I looked distractedly toward the other side of the street full of traffic. My eyes stopped unintentionally on a small and old pharmacy. A woman had just come out of there. She wore an old robe and a faded scarf that covered almost all her gray hair. She walked hunched over as if carrying an invisible weight. She went with her head down, hurried, trying to blend in with the crowd, dodging any gaze. A feeling of confused familiarity invaded me, and then a child ran in front of her. The woman turned her face slightly to avoid him. In that fleeting instant, the morning light illuminated her face. I stood paralyzed, my whole body tensed. The scar, a long scar marked from the cheekbone to the chin, deformed, unmistakable. It was her, the woman from the restaurant. My heart seemed to stop for a second and then started beating hard, so strong I could hear it rumbling in my ears. Hope, fear, and absolute urgency lit up in me. I did not think of anything. I dropped the cilantro I had in my hand. My bag slid off my shoulder. Several ripe tomatoes rolled down the sidewalk and were crushed by people's hurried steps. I did not care. I ran across the street, ignoring the cars passing by. I heard honks behind me, brakes screeching. I heard nothing. I only saw one thing: the hunched back of that woman. I caught up with her just as she turned into a narrower and less traveled street. "Ma'am, please wait!" I shouted with a broken voice. I reached out and grabbed the worn sleeve of her coat tightly. She jumped and turned around suddenly. Her eyes showed absolute panic, like a cornered animal. She tried to break free with a trembling voice, barely audible. "You are mistaking me for someone else. Please let me go." "No, I am not mistaken," I told her louder with a low voice, almost begging. Afraid she would disappear again. "It is me, the woman from the restaurant. My son. What you said, everything was true. Please, I need your help. I need to know why." The woman stood still. The fear in her look gave way to doubt, and then to a painful recognition. She looked me in the eyes filled with tears, and perhaps she saw in them a desperation so authentic that it could not be feigned. She looked around with suspicion, as if an enemy could appear at any moment. She said nothing more. She took me by the arm and pulled me, but not toward the main street, but toward a narrow, dark alley wedged between two old buildings. The smell of dampness and trash hit my nose. But I did not care. She was taking me to a safe place. The alley took us to the back of another street. She stopped in front of a cafeteria that looked neglected, with a worn wooden door and a curtain completely covering the window, isolating the interior from the noise of the outside world. She looked at me with a voice still dry from emotion and said, "Come in. Here, no one is going to pay attention to us." The old woman pushed the heavy wooden door, and a rusty bell hanging above rang with a dry and lonely timbre. Inside the cafe, darkness wrapped everything with a thick air of coffee, roasted until burnt, mixed with the strong smell of tobacco. That place seemed to exist outside the outside world, like a refuge for tired souls. There were only a couple of old men absorbed in a chessboard, immersed in their own world, without even looking up when we entered. The owner, with a thick mustache, was behind the bar. He barely greeted us with a slight nod before going back to cleaning a glass with reluctance. The old woman took me to the most hidden table in the corner behind a large column, from where we could see the whole place without anyone noticing our presence. She sat in front of me, instinctively choosing a position with her back to the door, as if it were part of an old habit of surveillance. "A black coffee without sugar," she told the waiter. I was too confused and nervous with a dry throat I could barely murmur. "A glass of water, please." The waiter brought the drinks and left immediately. The old woman held the coffee cup between her hands. The steam wrapped her like a mist, hiding a face marked by pain. She did not drink immediately. She just stayed in silence with those deep eyes fixed on me. In her look, there was not only fear hardened by time, but also contained fury and infinite sadness. The sadness of someone who has lost the most valuable thing in their life. I did not dare interrupt her. I knew she was fighting ghosts of the past, deciding if she should open a wound that never closed again. I stayed quiet with hands clasped on the table, waiting. Finally, she put the cup on the saucer with a dry clack that broke the silence. She spoke with a low and hoarse voice, as if she had been keeping what she was about to say for too long. I swore to my granddaughter's soul that I would never speak of this again, but if your son is about to become the next one, then keeping quiet would be a crime. She took a deep breath. My name is Mrs. Higgins. And then she began to tell. Memories came out like a broken dam. Her granddaughter Mary was an orphan since she was little and was raised solely by her. Mary used to be a happy girl, bright as the sun, but after a breakup she fell into deep depression. The light in her eyes went out. That was when she found Linda's Energy Center through an internet ad. That place promised sweet things, healing the wounds of the female soul, regaining balance with meditation and energy connection therapies. For a broken soul like Mary's, that was a lifesaver. Mrs. Higgins told how Mary started to change after joining the center. She became mysterious, distant. She no longer shared anything with her. She met constantly with new friends from the center, women with strange, empty looks. She started talking about things Mrs. Higgins did not understand about an entity called the Silent Mother and about the need to purify the soul. She told about the sect, the Devotees of Silence. It was not a true religion, but a kind of dark cult, an ancestral heresy that Linda, who called herself the Supreme Nun, had reinvented, mixing wild and cruel beliefs. Mrs. Higgins' voice broke when mentioning the most frightening rule of the cult. To reach ascension and greater power within the group members had to offer the soul of the person they loved most. They believed, she whispered, that the greater the sacrifice, the greater the blessing. I felt my blood freeze. One night, Mary returned home and begged her grandmother to accompany her to a special ceremony at the center, a ceremony to honor mothers and grandmothers. Mrs. Higgins, out of the great love she had for her granddaughter and wanting to get close to her again, accepted without suspecting anything. But Mary did not take her to the center of the city. The young woman drove to an old and secluded farm on the outskirts. Inside, dozens of people dressed in black robes stood in a circle chanting songs under the flickering light of candles. And in the middle of that circle was Linda, with a cold and expressionless face illuminated by the fire. Mrs. Higgins realized she had been tricked. Mary knelt crying and said desperately, "Grandma, I am sorry, but this is the only way to save my soul." Two large men held Mrs. Higgins, forcing her to drink a bitter liquid smelling of rotten root. But at that moment, her survival instinct kicked in. She pretended to swallow it and spat it out when they were not looking. When Linda approached with a shining ceremonial knife in her hand, Mrs. Higgins used all her strength. She bit the arm of one of the men and kicked Linda, making her fall backward. In the middle of the chaos, she managed to escape into the darkness. The scar on her face, the same one that had obsessed me, was caused by Linda's knife grazing her while she fought to free herself. She hid in a nearby abandoned barn until dawn before daring to return to the city. She reported it to the police, but they did not believe her. They thought she was a confused old woman in shock over her granddaughter's disappearance. When they went to check, the farm was empty without any trace. Mary disappeared without a trace. Days later, the sect sent a message to Mary's friends, saying she had fulfilled her mission and that her soul had risen to a higher plane. For the law, it was a missing person case. Mrs. Higgins' voice broke, but for me, it was murder. She looked at me with red eyes. That day in the restaurant, seeing Linda, I froze. And seeing your son sitting next to her with that tired and empty expression, just like my granddaughter was in her last days, I knew he was in danger. The amulet I gave you was one of those Mary brought home. I thought maybe it could warn you. She extended her hand over the table and squeezed mine tightly. Her thin hand trembled. Save your son. Do not let him end up like my granddaughter, whatever the cost. I could not answer. Tears ran down my cheeks. The truth was more horrible than my worst nightmares. My Michael, my son, was lying on a demon's altar. After a moment, I regained my composure, wiped my tears. Fear had given way to iron determination. Thank you, Mrs. Higgins. Thank you for having the courage to tell everything. We will not let history repeat itself. I stood up with a voice firmer than ever. I know someone. Someone who will never take us for crazy old women. Let's go see her right now." I quickly paid for the water and coffee and helped Mrs. Higgins get up. Her fragile body was still trembling uncontrollably after releasing that weight from her soul like a dry leaf in the wind. I knew I could not take her back to that house where every corner had Linda's eyes and ears, and I could not go back alone either, not with this truth burning inside. I did not call a taxi home. Instead, I gave the driver an address in the hills, a neighborhood of elegant, quiet houses with the best security in the city. It was Susan's house, my best friend since high school, the only person in this world I could fully trust. In the car, we both went in silence. Mrs. Higgins looked out the window, eyes lost in the people passing by, but I knew she was trapped in her own painful memories. I, on the other hand, went over all the information, every image, every word in my head. I was preparing for the most important conversation of my life. I could not make mistakes. Susan opened the door. She was a short and sturdy woman, hair short and almost completely gray, but the eyes behind her tortoiseshell glasses remained as sharp and intelligent as ever. She was surprised to see me, and even more to see the unknown and haggard woman accompanying me. She looked at both of us, noting our state of panic, and without saying a single word, she stepped back and opened the door wide. "Come in," she said with a grave and firm voice. She led us to the living room. The place was full of light and smelled of old books with a strange peace wrapping everything. She did not ask rushed questions or make us more nervous. Instead, she went to the kitchen in silence and returned a few minutes later with 3 cups of hot chamomile tea whose soft aroma was like a sedative. She sat in the armchair in front of us and looked me straight in the eyes. There was no curiosity in her look, but the concentration of someone used to hearing difficult stories. "Well, Adriana," she said, "what happened? That you have a face, like you have seen a ghost." I took a deep breath, looked at Mrs. Higgins and nodded, giving her the cue to start. And Mrs. Higgins spoke. This time without trembling, without panic. As if Susan's presence had given her invisible strength. Her voice was clear, firm, and orderly. She narrated every detail. From the change in Mary, the strange phrases, the gruesome ritual in the abandoned farm, to the escape by a hare. She omitted nothing, not even what the police had dismissed as fantasy. Susan listened without interrupting once. She put the cup aside, took a notebook and a pen from the table drawer, and started taking notes. Her fingers ran across the pages, noting names, places, key details. Her eyes had that professional investigator look, the same one I had seen in her when she was still working, and when Mrs. Higgins finished her story, voice broken by emotion. I continued with tea about Michael's strange attitudes about his emotional deterioration. I talked about the dinner at the restaurant, the old woman with the scar and the red cloth amulet, about the night I heard whispers in an unknown language, and what I saw through the crack of the door, white with a black tunic, a candle, and a horrendous, faceless statue. Then I said firmly, "And I have proof." I opened my cell phone gallery. I showed the screen to Susan. One by one, the images appeared sharp and cold. The antique wooden box, the deformed, faceless statue, the black candle with dried blood stains, and finally the pages full of strange symbols with the name Michael Johnson written over and over again, like a curse. Susan narrowed her eyes, looking at the phone. She was not just looking, she was analyzing. She used her fingers to zoom in on every image, examining in detail from the signs in the notebook to the texture of the dried bloodstains. Her face became increasingly serious. The calm with which she started vanished, and in its place appeared an expression of terrifying gravity. When I showed her all the photos, Susan leaned back in the chair and remained silent for a few seconds. In the room, only the constant ticking of the pendulum clock on the wall could be heard, every sound as if counting down for my son. Then she spoke with a firm and icy voice, every word like a hammer blow. "This is not superstition, Adriana. This is a criminal organization with methods that takes advantage of faith to manipulate and harm the blood on the candles and the crossed-out names in the notebook. My God, Adriana, you are living under the same roof as a monster." She did not hesitate for a second. She got up and walked with a decided step toward the landline phone in the corner of the room. She dialed a series of known numbers without looking at the agenda. She spoke on the phone with a completely different tone, direct and full of authority. The voice of a commander. "Miller, this is Susan. I need you to come to my house right now. Bring the recording equipment. I have a case. Very serious." She hung up and turned to look at me and Mrs. Higgins, who remained sitting motionless on the sofa. "They will come right away," she said with a softer voice, but just as firm. "They are a specialized unit in this type of case. From now on, you will be safe." Less than 20 minutes later, a black sedan without any police markings stopped silently in front of Susan's house. The car door opened, and a man of about 40 entered wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. He had a strong bearing, piercing eyes under thick eyebrows, and a strangely serene face, a calm typical of someone used to facing the darkest corners of society. Susan introduced him as Special Agent Detective Miller. Miller did not come alone. A young analyst named Helen followed him. She wore a professional blazer and brought with her a laptop and a specialized recorder. Her expression was focused and serious. Miller shook hands with Mrs. Higgins and me. His grip was firm, transmitting a sense of confidence. He looked us straight in the eyes and spoke with a deep but warm and authoritative voice. "Thank you for trusting us. Please tell everything again with as much detail as possible. Every detail, no matter how small, can be the key." Helen placed the recorder on the coffee table, and the red light turned on. Miller started the interview, although it did not feel like an interrogation. It was not like the police Mrs. Higgins had met before, those who looked at her with suspicion. He listened, really listened with absolute patience and concentration. He asked very specific questions, straight to the point. "Mrs. Adriana, do you remember exactly what language Linda spoke? What did it sound like? Any characteristic sound." Then he turned to me. "Are the symbols in the notebook familiar to you? Have you seen them before, perhaps in books or decorative objects?" Then he asked a question that made me shudder. "Besides, your son, did you see Linda have close contact or strange behaviors with anyone else? Was there anyone who frequented the house unusually?" I struggled to remember everything from the dark infusion Linda prepared for Michael every night, its strange aroma, to her furious reaction when I proposed taking my son to the doctor. Mrs. Higgins, encouraged by Miller's confidence, also shared more information. She tried to describe the faces of other members she remembered vaguely from that gruesome night, the furniture and objects from the old farm, even the symbols she had managed to see on the walls. While we spoke, Helen did not stop typing. Her screen showed lines of data maps images. Not only was she taking notes, she was cross-referencing our information with some huge database. When I sent her the photos with the evidence from my cell phone, Miller got up, walked behind her, and looked at the screen. He narrowed his eyes, looking at the photo of the notebook, and nodded firmly. "Yes, it is them," he said with a deeper voice. "The devotees of silence. We had already heard of this sect." A shiver ran down my back, so it was real. It had a name. He explained that his special unit had been tracking a series of covert organizations under names like healing centers, spiritual yoga classes, or women's support groups throughout the country. All these organizations were linked to mysterious disappearances, financial fraud, and psychological manipulation. The problem is that they operate as a network of independent cells, almost without direct connection between them. They use women who appear successful and trustworthy, like Linda, to cover themselves. Miller continued. The city group led by Linda is the most hermetic and enigmatic. We knew it existed, but we had never been able to identify its leader or its main location. They change places constantly and only communicate through encrypted channels. Miller looked at me and Mrs. Higgins with a serious expression. "What you provided today is a great breakthrough. It is the piece we were missing. Your testimony. Mrs. Higgins is the first we have from a survivor of their rituals. And your photos, Adriana, are the first physical proof connecting Linda Johnson directly to these dark activities." He pointed to his laptop screen where Helen had displayed a complex network map full of connections. "Linda Johnson is not just any member. According to the symbols in the notebook and what you told us, she is a key link, most likely the high priestess of this region, as Mrs. Higgins said. If we manage to arrest her and get that notebook, we could dismantle the whole network here." After gathering all the information, Miller explained the initial plan. First, they would establish 24-hour surveillance outside my house. They would use civilian vehicles and undercover agents as neighbors. A jogger, someone walking a dog, a couple inside a car. Every movement in the house would be recorded. Second, they would try to track Linda's phone and online activities, although Miller warned she is very cunning and probably won't make obvious mistakes. Susan proposed that Mrs. Higgins stay at her house. It is the safest place. Linda might have seen her at the market and might try to silence her. Miller agreed immediately. And finally, there was my role, the most important and also the most dangerous. I had to return to that house, go back to the wolf's den, and pretend nothing was happening. I could not show fear or suspicion. I had to continue being the mother-in-law, as always worried about her son's health. Before I left, Miller looked me straight in the eyes with a mixture of seriousness and understanding. Adriana, I know we are asking something very difficult. From now until we act, you will have to live with the enemy. But your son's safety and the success of this operation depend totally on your calm. Remember, we will be right outside. You are not alone. Returning home, I felt like I was entering a stage, being the main actress in a horror play. Every second was heavy. Suffocating, I cooked, cleaned, played with Sarah, but it was all acting. My smile remained rigid, and every word I said was carefully measured. I was a puppet moving my own strings under the gaze of two sides. On one hand, the special team hidden out there. On the other, the demon living with me under the same roof. I avoided looking Linda in the eyes. Her gaze seemed to have penetrating power. She had to strip all the secrets I tried to hide. When she asked me why I had taken so long at the market, my heart squeezed. "Oh, I bumped into a childhood friend by chance," I answered, forcing a natural tone. I hadn't seen her for years, so we stayed chatting for a while at a diner. I noticed Linda was also more alert. She became quieter with a silence that was scary. Many times while I was washing dishes or watching TV, I felt her eyes stuck on the back of my neck. When I turned around, she looked the other way. Maybe she saw Mrs. Higgins and me at the market. A silent war suffocating was being fought inside the kitchen, in the living room, in every breath we shared. Every night when I made sure Linda was asleep, I got under the blankets trembling and sent a short message to Susan from a secure app Miller had installed on my cell phone, only a few words. Everything remains the same. Or Michael seems weaker. Today he slept almost 16 hours. Every message was a covert cry for help. The morning of the third day after the meeting at Susan's house, I received a call from her asking me to come immediately. With the same excuse of visiting a friend, I left the house in a hurry. At Susan's house, the atmosphere was so tense you could cut it with a knife. Mrs. Higgins and Miller were already there, all with serious expressions. Miller did not beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "Surveillance is not working," he said, visibly frustrated. Linda became a turtle in her shell. She does not leave the house except to take and bring the girl and to go to the work center. All her communications are clean, not a call or a suspicious message. She does not use the cell phone to talk about the cult. It is as if she already suspected something. We are losing time, and Michael's condition can't take any more. The atmosphere became denser. Our patience was running out while my son's thread of life became thinner. Suddenly, Susan hit the table with the palm of her hand. The sound was dry, blunt. "If the fox does not leave her cave, we have to make her leave." She looked at Miller, then at me. "We cannot keep waiting for her to make the move. We have to force her to move." We all fixed our eyes on her. Susan continued with a voice sharp as a razor. "Helen already verified. According to the information in Linda's notebook, and crossing with the cult calendar Miller's team has gathered in other cases, the day after tomorrow is the night of the black moon. It is when their power is strongest, and they usually do the most important rituals." She paused for a second and looked me directly in the eyes with a mixture of firmness and regret. Linda is not going to miss that opportunity, especially now that she feels something threatens her. She is going to accelerate Michael's sacrifice. And then she said what I had already been fearing. "Adriana, we need you to be the bait." A shiver ran down my back. I would have to face Linda face to face, trick her, and put my son's life and mine at risk in a single play. The plan was drawn out in detail, with second precision. The night of the black moon, I had to create the perfect occasion for Linda. I had to pave the way. According to Miller's analysis, Linda would surely try to get Sarah out of the house to have a clear path. I had to act as if I suspected nothing. I even had to seem happy about it. When Sarah left, I would tell Linda my head hurt a lot, a symptom I sometimes suffered and she knew well. I am going to say I need to sleep early and take a sleeping pill. That will make Linda believe I will be asleep like a rock and that I am no longer a hindrance. Helen will give me a fake pill identical to the one I usually take, and most importantly, a button with a tracking device and tiny microphone. I have to sew it to the pajamas I will wear that night. As soon as Linda takes Michael out of the house, as soon as I hear the car engine, I must immediately notify Miller's team, who will be hidden in civilian cars at the beginning of the street. Then they will follow them to the sect's hideout. Listening to the plan, I felt my heart jumping out of my chest. But when the image of Michael weak and soulless appeared in my mind, I nodded without hesitation. I will do it. That night, Helen met me in secret in a park near home under the shadow of an old oak. She gave me the special button, small but containing my son's entire life. She taught me how to activate it, how to make it work in the best way. She also handed me a spare cell phone with an emergency channel already configured with just one button. "Take care, ma'am," she told me with a worried voice. Returning home, the silence was terrifying. Linda was in the kitchen with her back to me. She was using a stone mortar grinding something. The rhythmic tapping was constant. A strong and spicy smell of herbs, familiar, but today nauseating, spread through the air. Hearing my steps, she lifted her head and smiled, a smile that I knew with total certainty was fake. "Did you go for a walk, Mom?" she asked with a sweet voice. "Tonight, I am going to send Sarah to sleep at her little friend Camila's house so they can play for a while. She hasn't gone for a long time, so we will have the house quieter." The script had begun exactly as Miller predicted. My performance had to begin too. I put a hand to my head and frowned as if feeling great pain. "Oh, that is good," I said with a weak voice. "My head has been hurting since the afternoon. I think I'm going to take a sleeping pill soon. I can't take it anymore." Linda looked at me, narrowing her eyes. For a second, an icy spark shone in her look, a spark of calculation, of satisfaction. I could not know exactly what she was thinking, but I was clear on one thing. The prey had bitten the hook. After dinner, Linda cleaned everything up at impressive speed. She changed and put on black clothes from head to toe. Then she took Sarah to the door and bent down to kiss her forehead. "Have a good time, my love. I will pick you up tomorrow morning." Sarah waved at me happy and ran to the neighbor's house. Her clear laughter was lost in the darkness, leaving a deadly silence. The door closed. In the house, only 3 remained: me, my son, and the witch I had for a daughter-in-law. The air became thick, tense, like a rope about to break. I played my role to perfection. I put my hand to my head and walked staggering as if I were going to faint. "I can't take it anymore," I moaned. "I have to lie down." Linda ran to help me. Her concern so exaggerated it turned out fake. "Yes, Mom, go rest. Do not worry. I will take care of Michael." She even poured me a glass of water. I looked her in the eyes, searching for a bit of humanity, but only a cold void. I entered my room, leaving the door ajar. I took the fake tranquilizer pill Helen gave me and took it just as Linda passed in front of the door, taking a peek to make sure. Then I lay down, covered myself completely, and began to pretend I breathed deep and even, like someone already asleep. But under the blankets, my eyes were wide open, stuck in the darkness. My whole body was tense. My heart beat hard in my chest. All my senses were at the maximum. I could hear even the smallest sound, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the creaking of the wooden floor when someone passed the soft whistle of the wind outside the window. About an hour later, I heard Linda whisper something to Michael in the room next door. I did not understand what she was saying. It was just a low murmur, like a spell. But I clearly heard my son's voice answering her with a monotone tone without a soul. "Yes, my love. It is okay. I understand." He seemed like a robot receiving orders. Around 11 at night, when the darkness was already dense and thick, I heard the door of their room open. Then steps, some light. Linda's others, heavy, dragging on the floor, Michael's. They went down the stairs. I waited 5 more minutes. 5 minutes that felt like a century to make sure they had gone. Then I slid out of bed carefully. I stuck my ear to the door listening. When I heard Linda's car engine start and leave the garage, I immediately took out the spare phone I had hidden under the pillow. I pressed send on the only message I had already drafted for Miller. They are gone. Without losing a second, I took off my pajamas and put on the dark clothes I already had prepared. I did not go out the front door, but sneaked out the back, crossed the garden in the dark, and ran to the end of the street where an old delivery truck, nothing flashy, was parked under a tree. The back door of the vehicle opened as soon as I approached. Miller extended his hand and helped me enter. Inside the truck, there were no packages but a mobile monitoring center with screens and electronic equipment blinking. Helen was sitting in front of a big screen with professional headphones on. She greeted me with a slight nod, with a tense and concentrated look. "We already have a signal from the button on your blouse," Helen said, pointing to a red dot moving on the digital map, "and the audio is clear." The truck started gently, keeping a prudent distance from Linda's vehicle. I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the screen with my heart shrunk. Helen passed me a second headphone. I listened to Linda's voice. She was reciting those spells in that horrendous language to Michael with a hypnotic, imperative tone. My son said nothing. Only his breathing could be heard, choppy, heavy. Linda's car was not heading to the city center, but taking a course towards the outskirts, a desolate area with abandoned fields and dirt roads full of potholes. The sky was completely dark without stars. A night of the new moon. The red dot on the map stopped in a wide lot, in the middle of which was a structure similar to an old mansion abandoned for a long time, rising like a monster in the darkness. Other cars were already parked under the nearby trees. "They arrived," Miller said over the radio. "Everyone to your positions." Our truck stopped at a safe distance. Agents dressed in black, armed, came out silently from the other vehicles, moving like shadows surrounding the area completely. Miller handed me night vision binoculars. Stay in the truck. Safety is the most important thing. Through the binoculars, the diffuse images in the darkness became clear. In a ghostly green, I saw a scene that will haunt me for the rest of my life. About 20 people dressed in black robes formed a large circle in front of the mansion. In the center was an ancient stone altar, with a circle drawn with a dark liquid I knew perfectly well was blood. Linda guided Michael, who now only wore a thin white tunic, toward the center of the circle. His eyes were closed, his face expressionless like a sleepwalker walking toward his execution. Linda began the ritual. She shouted some spells loudly, and the crowd repeated them like a macabre choir. Her chants rumbled in the silent night of the black moon. Linda raised her arms to the sky. Someone in the crowd handed her a wooden box, the same one I had found. Linda opened it. By the candlelight, the ceremonial dagger shone with a deadly glow. She took it and raised it above Michael's head, who was kneeling unconscious. Silence took over the place. The air seemed to have frozen. That was the moment of sacrifice. "No!" I screamed without thinking, but the scream was drowned by the vehicle's soundproofing. In that instant, Miller ordered over the radio with a voice as cold as steel, "Move in." The powerful headlights of the hidden police vehicles turned on all at the same time, illuminating the entire area and turning night into day. A firm voice resonated through the loudspeaker, breaking the chilling stillness. "Police, nobody move, drop your weapons." Chaos broke out. The followers, terrified, shouted and looked for how to flee, but all paths were blocked by the shadows of the special forces. Linda stood paralyzed with the knife still high. Her face, illuminated by the headlights, showed no fear, but a colossal rage. The fury of a desecrated goddess, she screamed with a wild and deafening shriek and brought the knife down with determination, decided to complete the ritual. But an agent managed to approach just in time and gave her a brutal blow on the wrist with his baton. The knife went flying and stuck in the ground. 2 more agents took her down and handcuffed her immediately. Losing control of Linda, Michael wobbled like a puppet without strings and fell to the ground unconscious. The paramedics, who were already prepared, ran toward him, put him on a stretcher and took him urgently. When they took Linda away right in front of the truck where I was, she looked in my direction. Although she could not see me in the darkness, I felt she knew I was there. She moved her lips, whispering her last spells, with a look full of hate and curses. The dense darkness of that night of the black moon was followed by a violent glare of camera flashes and sensational headlines on the covers of all newspapers. The case of the Black Moon sect shook the whole country. Linda's beautiful but icy face appeared on all channels no longer as a respected energy expert, but as the supreme priestess of a savage cult. In the chaotic days that followed while I watched over Michael in the hospital, Miller told me the real magnitude of the crime we had helped uncover. That abandoned mansion was not only a temple of rituals, it was a lair of evil. In the basement, they rescued 5 more young women who were held in deplorable physical and mental conditions. They were reserve sacrifices, or members who had tried to escape and were recaptured. Tortured both psychologically and physically, the notebooks they found revealed even more disgusting truths. That organization not only practiced dark rituals, it also forced credulous women who came to Linda's center in search of healing to participate in immoral activities to raise funds for the sect. Hundreds of notebooks with lists of members, amounts of offerings, and calendars of ceremonies were seized, becoming irrefutable evidence. With all that evidence, along with the overwhelming testimonies of mine, Mrs. Higgins, and the rescued victims, the trial took place quickly. Linda, along with the main ringleaders, was sentenced to life imprisonment for a long list of crimes: attempted homicide, illegal deprivation of liberty, dissemination of dark cults fraud, and organization of activities that threatened the physical integrity of other people. The day the sentence was handed down, I saw Mrs. Higgins break into tears, but they were no longer tears of pain, but of liberation for her granddaughter's soul. Michael woke up in the hospital after 2 days in a coma. He opened his eyes, looked at me, and then looked at the white ceiling with bewilderment. He remembered nothing about the night of the black moon, nor about the months of confusion he had lived. His last memory was any given morning getting ready to go to work. The doctors said he had been affected by a hallucinogenic and highly debilitating drug for the nervous system. Mixed skillfully in Linda's herbal teas for a long time, his body would need time to detoxify, and his mind even more to heal completely. A month after the trial, I decided to sell the house in the city. It was no longer a home, but a tomb keeping terrifying memories. Every corner, every object reminded me of Linda, her whispers, and the image of my son fading little by little. I used all my life savings to buy a charming little house in a town upstate near a quiet pine forest. I wanted the 3 of us, my granddaughter, my son, and me, to live in a clean place where the air did not smell of lies and evil anymore. I wanted us to start over. Michael was recovering little by little. He attended his psychological therapies regularly. At first he spoke very little, spent hours in silence looking out the window. But with time he began to open up again. He started talking about his work, about plans for the future. Most importantly, he spent more time with Sarah, as if trying to compensate for the months he had neglected her unintentionally. I will never forget an afternoon when I was sitting on the porch knitting a half-finished sweater, watching Michael building a sandcastle with Sarah in the yard. She laughed out loud when Michael clumsily knocked over one of the towers. And then, for the first time in many months, very many months, Michael smiled. A real smile, warm, radiant, and no longer empty. Tears came out on their own, rolled down my cheeks, and fell on the ball of yarn. My son had returned. Mrs. Higgins returned to her hometown to live with her loved ones. But we still talk on the phone every week. She was no longer a stranger I met by chance in a restaurant. She became part of my family, a dear friend, united by adversity. Susan still drives from the city to visit us from time to time. She never arrives empty-handed. She always brings her homemade cornbread that I like so much, and funny gossip from a retired ex-police officer. One Sunday afternoon, Mrs. Higgins and Susan came to visit us both. There were 4 of us, me, my 2 soul friends, and my little granddaughter. We were sitting together on the porch of the new house, drinking tea, eating cake, and watching Michael teaching Sarah with patience how to plant a small sunflower in a clay pot. He showed her how to arrange the soil, how to water it. The golden light of the sunset fell on father and daughter, wrapping them in a warm halo. Mrs. Higgins reached out, took my hand and squeezed it gently. "We did it, Adriana." I smiled and nodded. Tears appeared again, but this time they were of happiness. The storm had passed. The darkness could have tried to swallow us. It could have left scars that never heal completely, but in the end, the light of family love and the courage of ordinary women triumphed. And in front of my eyes, a new life was being sown, promising a bright future, always looking toward the sun. And now, when everything has come to light, when the culprits were exposed, I just want to say something to whoever listens to this story. Never let silence kill those you love. In life, there are things that seem absurd, impossible. But if your heart tells you, if your intuition screams that something is not right, then believe it. Being a mother is not just loving a child, it is also daring to cross fear to protect him. Even when the whole world turns its back on you, the truth sometimes hides behind the most perfect masks. And to tear them off, you have to pay with lucidity, firmness, and unconditional love. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We do not tell this to judge, but with the hope that someone listens and stops to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own home, I really wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face everything to recover your voice? I want to know your opinion on this story of stories that hurt, or any suggestions you have to help us improve our content. God always blesses, and I am sure courage will lead us to better days. Right now, on the final screen, I will leave 2 of the most beloved stories on the channel. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.